Steve, great to be with you. Yeah, I live in New Hampshire. I got to vote in the primary. I did some TV interviews at their New Hampshire headquarters. So it's kind of right in the center of the whole thing. It's really interesting. When you have a political opponent or you're trying to push some idea in the media or whatever, the truth doesn't matter anymore, except for in certain channels, this channel and certain others. But basically, people care more about the narrative than the truth. So the narrative that came out of New Hampshire goes something like this. Donald Trump won a very substantial victory that was expected, but he actually did a little bit better than some people expected. But, they did exit polling for the Nikki Haley voters. Now, New Hampshire is kind of a funny state. It's only 30% Republican and 30% Democrat, approximately, in registration, which means 40% of the people in New Hampshire are registered as independents. It's the biggest party in New Hampshire, if you want to think of it that way, are the independents. But we have a funny system. If you're an independent, you can walk in and request either ballot. You can pick a Republican ballot or Democratic ballot and go vote. So a lot of independents, and I know, so I talk to people online, friends and so forth, who lean liberal. They got a ballot and they got a Republican ballot. They voted for Nikki Haley, and that's where a lot of her support came from. So the narrative was, look, Trump dominated the Republicans and got a very substantial percentage of the vote and all that, but he can't win the general election unless he reaches out to moderates and people, undecideds and moderates and independents and so forth. And he didn't get them. They went heavily for Nikki Haley. But here's the thing. The narrative is false. So many of the independents who voted for Nikki Haley are never going to vote for Trump. They hate Trump. They're liberals, they're progressives, they're closet Democrats, whatever you want to call them. They got the Republican ballot. They voted for Nikki Haley just to stick it to Trump, but they're never going to vote for Trump. Trump didn't lose those votes. He never had them in the first place. So that's the first thing. That the Nikki Haley vote was largely a Democratic vote or independent leaning Democrat, and Trump didn't lose the thing because he's not going to get those votes. Now, that's New Hampshire. You go around the country, you don't have these open primaries. Some states you do, but many of them you don't. So we'll get a much purer kind of Republican vote. When people say, I don't think Nikki Haley's going to win South Carolina, I don't think Nikki Haley's going to make it to South Carolina. I think she's going to withdraw before the South Carolina primary, which comes toward the end of February. The money's drying up and the momentum is not there. So the other kind of narrative about this is that Trump can't win because he can't get the independents. I don't believe that, but that's the narrative. But what every analyst is missing, the top analysts, network TV, etc., they're underestimating or ignoring the role of third parties. Now, a typical third party year is, you get a Jill Stein on the Green Party. She gets 1%, 2% maybe, whatever. At the margin, it can make a difference in a small number of instances, but it doesn't affect the national outcome. But that's not true this year. The models, you have to look at 1992, 1968, and 1912. Those were the 3 years when the third party made a huge difference. 1992, Ross Perot got 0 states, but he got 19% of the vote, almost certainly cost George H.W. Bush the election. 1968 is a funny year. It was George Wallace. He mentioned George Wallace. He was some segregationist governor in Alabama and all that. George Wallace won 5 states. He actually wasn't just got a certain percentage of the vote. He won 5 states in the Electoral College. Hubert Humphrey only won 18 states. Go back to 1912, Teddy Roosevelt lost the nomination. He was competing with Taft. He started the third party, the Bull Moose Party. Pardon me. The Bull Moose Party outperformed the Republican Party. The Bull Moose Party got about 27%. Republicans got about 24%. And Woodrow Wilson only got 41%. But Woodrow Wilson won the election because Roosevelt and Taft split the Republican vote. If you combine them, they were over 50%. They would have won. But Woodrow Wilson got over 400 electoral votes. It was an electoral landslide because of that. This year looks more like one of those years. RFK Jr.'s, polling consistently around 15%. Jill Stein's back in it. Maybe she's a 1 or 2%er. Not clear. No labels. I have some experience. I worked with I was managing a campaign for a potential presidential candidate in 2012. And at the time, there was a third-party channel called Americans Elect. It ended up not doing much because they were okay with Mitt Romney, but there was a concern that the Republicans were a little more radical. Anyway, so I have a lot of experience in how you get on the ballot and how third parties actually work. And I'm looking at No Labels. They're doing the homework. By the way, it costs maybe $20 million or more to get on the ballot because you got a lot of lawyers and groundwork and all that. But I don't know who their candidate's going to be. There's talk about Joe Manchin, John Huntsman, Dean Phillips, who was the Democrat who ran against Biden in the New Hampshire primary. He may do it. But the point is, yeah, thanks, Steve. We have a link at rickardswarroom.com. So it's rickardswarroom.com. Go there. You'll see all the information on the newsletters and also my book, Currency Wars, which it's funny. Currency Wars came out in 2011. There's a subchapter on Russia, Ukraine, natural gas, and war. So it was 10, 12 years ahead of its time, but it's still fresh. So rickardswarroom.com is our link. With Joe Stein's on the Green Party, which is on the ballot in, I believe, almost all 50 states. So she might be in the 1 to 2% category. She'll be on the ballot. No Labels is doing a good job. I wouldn't underestimate RFK Jr. He's savvy, political dynasty. They've got the money. They're working on it. It takes time. The good thing about RFK Jr., he can skip the primaries, and they're working towards November. Obviously, they're not worried about the primary season. The Cornel West is interesting. He's a neo-Marxist. I probably don't agree with one of his policies, but he is brilliant. He's brilliant. He's articulate. He's telegenic. He's got that X factor you need to, be on TV and appeal to people. So again, don't agree with his policies, but I respect his intelligence and his ability. The point is, if that crowd, if all four of them, and you're right, some are going to be on some ballots, not others, but if they collectively get to 15, 20%, the last 3 or 4 elections, actually going all the way back to Bush Gore in 2000, they were about 1%, 1.5%. They were extremely close. So you take a 15%, even a 15% factor or a 10% factor, that's heavily Biden people looking for another candidate. They don't want to vote for Trump. Fine, okay, but you take 10 or 15% away from Biden, Trump wins easily. I would actually expect, and the popular vote, he might not win because you get 7 million more Democrats in California, but you could have an electoral college landslide. That could very well be the case. There are other factors going on, Steve, that play into this now. It's traditional immigrants come and they congregate in certain cities, the Irish and Jewish populations in New York, but the Arab population, Arab immigrants and Arab Americans are heavily concentrated in Detroit. And of course, Detroit's critical and Michigan's a swing state. They are turning against Biden because of what's going on in Gaza and Hamas-Israel war. Now, we don't have to do a deep dive on the war, but it's there, and they are very, very upset about Biden's position on that. I'm not saying they're going to vote for Trump, but they may just stay home. The other group that's fading really quickly, leaving the Democrats and actually going to the Republicans, going to Trump, are African Americans, but particularly African American men. Now that vote's traditionally 95% Democrat, 5% Republican. Okay, so I'm not saying there's going to be 50% Republican, but even if you got 10%, a 10% shift towards the Republicans, African Americans are 12% of the population. So take 10% of 12%, that's 1.2%. That by itself is enough to tip the election. And one part of what's moving African American men, first of all, they're very unhappy. 50 years or longer of Democratic rule, blue cities and blue states, and they have nothing to show for it. I mean, crime's worse, education's worse, et cetera. But there's this, the Biden's trying to ban menthol cigarettes, and African American men have a preference for menthol cigarettes. I only smoked 2 packs in my life when I was 12 years old some time ago, but they're menthol. I was smoking Newports. But the point is, things like that actually can tip behavior one way or the other. So you got a lot of things going on, and they all favor Trump. The third parties will be predominantly Biden, people looking for a home. It all favors Trump.